1 year later. The city of Abuja was alive with its usual rhythm of luxury and secrecy. People went about their business, cars honked in the distance, and inside one of the most expensive rooftop restaurants in Maitama, a man sat across from a woman, a proposal ring between them. His name was Toby Aodile. He was everything a woman could dream of: handsome, wealthy, and dangerously charming. The woman sitting before him? Chisom Obianuju. She stared at the diamond ring on the table, her heart pounding. This was everything she had ever wanted. A new man. A new love. A new beginning. But even as Toby held her hand, whispering sweet promises of forever, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen this before. Because she had. Because it had already happened once. And she knew how it ended. Chisom should have told Toby everything. She should have warned him about Daniel, Olido, and the curse that never truly ended. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because no one would believe her. Because Daniel had already been erased from this world. Because, to everyone else, she was just a woman who had been single for years. No one remembered the past. No one remembered Daniel. Only she did. And the more she tried to forget, the more the past pushed back. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the whisper came. Soft. Familiar. It's your turn now. Chisom sat up, her heart pounding. No. No, please. The shadows in the room moved. And then, she felt it. The cold weight of a bracelet on her wrist. The same one that had vanished months ago. The curse was still alive. And this time, it wasn't letting go. The next day, Chisom visited Mama Ebel in Gwagwalada. The old woman took one look at her and sighed. You saw it again, didn't you? Chisom nodded. Mama Ebel shook her head. I warned you. The curse never ends. You should never have accepted another man's love. Chisom's throat tightened. I didn't accept it yet, Mama. He only proposed. The old woman's eyes darkened. Then you still have time. She took Chisom's hands in hers. Listen to me, child. If you marry him, he will die. Chisom's body stiffened. What? Mama Ebel's voice was dead serious. The curse needs a sacrifice. And since Daniel is gone, the spirit will take your next love instead. The words hit Chisom like a blow to the chest. Toby. Toby was in danger. The cycle was repeating. And this time, it would end in blood. That evening, Chisom sat in Toby's penthouse, watching him pour them a glass of wine. He was so carefree, so happy. He had no idea what was coming for him. You've been quiet, he said, smiling. Did I scare you with my proposal? Chisom forced a smile she didn't feel. No, it's just a lot to process. He moved closer, pulling her into his arms. I get it, babe. Take your time. But you know I love you, right? She swallowed hard. Love. That word felt like a curse now. She had heard it before. From Daniel. And look what happened to him. She looked at Toby, memorizing his face. If she stayed, he would die. If she left, maybe, just maybe, he would be safe. The choice was clear. She had to let him go. Even if it broke her heart. Later that night, as she packed her bags, ready to leave Abuja behind forever, there was a knock at the door. A slow, deliberate knock. Her hands froze over her suitcase. She turned to the door, her breath catching in her throat. No one else knew she was here. Slowly, she walked toward it. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. She took a deep breath. And opened it. The hallway was empty. But on the floor, resting on a white cloth, was a wedding ring. The same ring Daniel had once given her. Her stomach twisted in horror. She slammed the door shut, heart pounding. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Somewhere in the shadows of Abuja, a man walked alone. Tall. Silent. Dangerous. He didn't know who he was. But he knew where he needed to go. To her. To Chisom. The cycle was beginning again. And he was a part of it now. A past that had been erased. A love that had been forgotten. And a curse that was waiting to be fulfilled. Again. And again. And again. Chisholm sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wedding ring lying on the floor. It was the same golden band Daniel had once placed on her finger. The one that should have been lost forever. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, a whisper slid through the air. "You cannot escape me." Chisholm jerked back, gasping. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She grabbed the ring, rushed to her bathroom, and threw it into the sink. Water splashed as she twisted the faucet, watching the ring spin. But it didn't go down the drain. It just sat there, mocking her. The air in the room grew colder. And then, the bathroom mirror fogged up. Slowly, words began appearing on the glass. Written in an invisible hand. "I never left." Chisholm's breath caught. She backed away. And in the reflection, standing behind her, she saw him. Daniel. But his eyes were hollow. Empty. Dead. And just as she turned, he vanished. The mirror shattered. And the ring. It was back on her finger. Meanwhile, across the city, Toby sat in his office, scrolling through his phone. Something felt off. He had been feeling it for weeks. Like someone was watching him. Like something wasn't right. His assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." Toby frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone. She says she's an old friend." Toby sighed. "Send her in." A few moments later, the door opened. And a woman stepped inside. Dressed in a white lace gown. With golden bracelets on her wrists. Her long black hair flowed like silk. Her eyes were deep, ancient, knowing. And when she smiled, his blood ran cold. Because he had never met her before. And yet, she looked so familiar. "Do I know you?" Toby asked, his voice uncertain. The woman tilted her head, studying him. "Not yet," she whispered. "But you will." Then, before he could say anything else, she turned and walked away, leaving behind only the scent of something sweet and something rotting. Back in Guagualada, Mama Ebel sat in her dimly lit hut, staring into the water bowl. The reflection rippling, showing her visions of the past. And then, visions of what was coming. Her heart tightened. "This is not how it's supposed to go," she muttered. Nkem, the young priestess beside her, frowned. "What do you see?" Mama Ebel's voice shook. "It is no longer Olido who haunts them." "Then who?" Nkem asked. The water rippled again. And a name formed on the surface. A name neither woman had spoken in a long time. Daniel. Nkem's eyes widened. "That's not possible." He was erased. Mama Ebel's face was grim. Not erased. Taken. And now, he is something different. Chisholm sat in bed, hugging her knees. The room felt suffocating. She hadn't told Toby about the ring appearing. She didn't want him to think she was losing her mind. But deep inside, she knew. Daniel was back. And he wanted something. She closed her eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. But then, a voice. Low. Deep. Familiar. "Do you still love me, Chisholm?" Her eyes snapped open. She whipped around, heart pounding. There, sitting in the armchair across the room, was Daniel. He wasn't a shadow this time. He was real. Or at least, he looked real. His skin was smooth, flawless. But his eyes were wrong. Completely black. Void of light. Of life. Of soul. She couldn't move. "Say it," Daniel whispered. "Say you still love me." Chisholm's voice caught in her throat. "You're not real." Daniel's head tilted slightly. "If I'm not real, then why is my ring still on your finger?" Chisholm looked down. The engagement ring was there. But it was no longer gold. It had turned black. And as she watched in horror, it tightened, crushing her finger. Daniel smiled. "See, you never truly left me." Then, the lights blew out. The windows burst open. And just before darkness swallowed the room, Daniel whispered one final thing. "Run, if you want. But the curse isn't looking for a bride anymore." It's looking for a groom. That same night, Toby sat alone in his penthouse, feeling strangely restless. His mind kept replaying the mysterious woman from earlier. Her voice. Her eyes. That strange familiarity. And then, as he stood to pour himself a drink, his phone rang. He frowned, checking the screen. No caller ID. His finger hovered over the decline button. But something made him answer. Hello. At first. Silence. Then, a soft laugh. You don't know me yet, do you? Toby's blood ran cold. Who is this? The voice whispered something that made his stomach drop. Did you think the curse only followed the women? Toby's breath hitched. What are you talking about? Another low chuckle. You're next, Toby. Welcome to the cycle. And then, the line went dead. Toby sat in his penthouse, still gripping his phone. The call had ended minutes ago, but the words still echoed in his mind. You're next, Toby. Welcome to the cycle. The voice had been calm, almost amused, like it knew something he didn't. His fingers trembled as he set his phone down. This had to be a prank. Someone messing with him. Because curses weren't real. Right. But then, the lights flickered. The room temperature dropped. And behind him, the window glass fogged up. Toby's stomach clenched as he slowly turned. And saw the words appearing on the glass. Words written in an invisible hand. Do you accept your vow? Toby's breath hitched. What the hell? The room grew colder. Then, in the silence, he heard it. A soft tapping. Like fingernails against glass. He whipped around. But the balcony was empty. Or so he thought. Until he saw the reflection in the window. A woman, dressed in white, standing behind him. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her lips curled into a smile. Toby's body locked in place. He could feel her breathing on his neck. Who are you? He whispered. The woman leaned in closer. And in a voice dripping with familiarity, she whispered. I am your bride. Then, the lights exploded. And the room plunged into darkness. Chisholm didn't wait until morning. She rushed to Toby's penthouse, heart pounding in her chest. Everything was happening too fast. The cycle was repeating. And this time, the curse wasn't after her. It was after him. She banged on the door. Toby, open up. No response. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Chisholm's hands shook as she reached for the doorknob. To her surprise, it was unlocked. She stepped inside. And immediately felt it. A presence. Something dark. Something watching. The air was thick with a scent she recognized. Jasmine and decay. Olido. Or worse. Something new. Toby, she called out, voice unsteady. Silence. Then. A creak. From the bedroom. Chisholm moved carefully, each step heavy with dread. She pushed the door open. And froze. Toby was sitting on the edge of the bed. His back to her. His posture stiff, unnatural. His head was tilted downward. And in his hands, he was holding a wedding ring. A blackened, rusted band. The same kind Daniel had once given her. Chisholm's breath caught in her throat. Toby, she whispered. Slowly. Too slowly. He turned to face her. And when she saw his eyes, she staggered back. They were pitch black. Just like Daniel's had been. Back in Guagualada, Mama Ebel sat before the fire, staring into the water bowl. What she saw made her stomach drop. No, she whispered. Nkem, standing beside her, frowned. What is it? Mama Ebel's voice shook. The curse has changed. Nkem's brows furrowed. What do you mean? The water in the bowl rippled violently. Mama Ebel looked up, her wrinkled hands trembling. It no longer wants to punish the women. Then who? Mama Ebel's eyes darkened. The men. Nkem's body went cold. Toby is in danger. Mama Ebel nodded slowly. No. Not just Toby. She reached for an old, dusty book and opened it to a page filled with ancient Igbo writings. The passage translated to one thing. A groom must pay the price. Mama Ebel inhaled sharply. This time, the curse will only end if a man takes Olido's place. Nkem's blood ran cold. Then that means, the only way to stop it. Mama Ebel finished the sentence for her. A man must be sacrificed. Silence. Then, Nkem asked the one question neither of them wanted to say aloud. Who? Back in the penthouse, Chisholm watched in terror as Toby's fingers tightened around the wedding ring. His black eyes locked onto hers. You should have told me, he said. His voice sounded like his, but not. It was deeper. Distorted. Like two voices speaking at once. Toby. Chisholm whispered. Listen to me. We need to leave. Now. Toby's lips curled into a smile that wasn't his own. It's too late, Chisholm. Then. His head snapped back violently. A low growl escaped his throat. And when he looked at her again, blood was leaking from his eyes. Chisholm's scream caught in her throat. Then. The room trembled. And the whisper came. Soft. Familiar. The cycle must be completed. The window shattered. The shadows in the room twisted. And for a brief moment, Chisholm saw another figure standing behind Toby. Tall. Dressed in black. Eyes empty. Daniel. He smirked at her. Then whispered. I told you, love. The curse isn't looking for a bride anymore. It's looking for a groom. Then. The room exploded into darkness. The room trembled as Daniel's ghostly form stood behind Toby, his black eyes gleaming with amusement. You thought you could escape me, Chisholm? Daniel whispered, his voice echoing from the walls. Toby staggered forward, gripping his head, groaning in pain. His body twitched unnaturally, his veins darkening. He was losing himself. Becoming a part of the curse. Chisholm. Toby's voice wavered, struggling against the force taking over him. Get out, now. But Chisholm refused to run. She wasn't going to let the curse take another man. Not Daniel. Not Toby. Not anyone. She had to end it. Forever. Back in Guagualada, Mama Ebel and Nkem were preparing for the final battle. The old woman flipped through ancient scrolls, muttering spells under her breath. She had seen the truth in her visions. The curse could only be broken in two ways. By taking a life. Which was what the curse wanted. Or. By returning Olido's soul to the living world. Nkem frowned. But Olido is already dead. Mama Ebel's eyes darkened. Yes. But her spirit was never at peace. If we can guide her back to her true self, she will end the curse herself. Nkem inhaled sharply. And how do we do that? Mama Ebel closed her eyes, gripping her prayer beads tightly. Chisholm must reach her first. Back in the penthouse, the walls groaned and cracked as the curse fully consumed Toby. Daniel stood in the shadows, smirking. It's over, love, he murmured. Give in. Let him go. Chisholm ignored him. She focused on Toby, who was now gasping, his body fighting against the possession. She could still see him. The real him. Toby, she shouted. Listen to me. You are not the curse. You are not its prisoner. Toby's black eyes flickered, like a battle was raging inside him. For a moment, just a moment, he looked at her. And that was all she needed. Chisholm turned to Daniel's ghostly form. I won't let you win. Daniel's smirk vanished. Chisholm grabbed Toby's trembling hands, pressing her forehead against his. Come back to me, Toby. I love you. And I'm not losing you to this. A pulse of energy burst from between them. The curse screamed. Daniel's form flickered violently. And then, a new voice filled the air. Soft. Ancient. Painful. Enough. A golden light exploded through the room, forcing Daniel backward. The air rippled. And then, she appeared. Olido. But not as a vengeful spirit. Not as a monster. She was whole. Beautiful. Dressed in the wedding attire she was once meant to wear. Her eyes, once filled with rage, were now filled with sorrow. You have carried my pain for too long, she whispered to Daniel. But the curse was never mine to bear. It was yours. Daniel staggered back. No. I was only trying to survive. Olido shook her head. No. You were the final piece of this cycle. And now, I free you. She raised her hand. The air shook. Daniel screamed as his form dissolved into dust. The penthouse walls cracked open, revealing a sky filled with golden light. The curse was breaking. The cycle was ending. Olido turned to Chisholm and Toby. It is over. Live. Love. And never forget what has been lost. And then. She vanished. Forever. Chisholm woke up to the sound of birds singing. For the first time in years, she felt free. Toby lay beside her, his breathing steady. His eyes normal. His body no longer bound by the curse. She touched his face, tears falling freely. We did it. Toby stirred, blinking at her. Did what? Chisholm froze. The curse. Don't you remember? Toby frowned. What curse? Chisholm's heart skipped a beat. He didn't remember. It was as if none of it had ever happened. A small smile pulled at her lips. She was okay with that. She lay back down, closing her eyes. The nightmare was over. For good. Back in Guagualada, Mama Ebel knelt before the fire, whispering her last prayer. Olido, may your soul finally rest. The flames flickered. And in the smoke, for just a moment, she saw her. Olido. Smiling. At peace. The cycle was finally broken. No more lost souls. No more vengeful spirits. Only the future. And for the first time in centuries, there was hope. Hello, wonderful Africtalis TV family. Today, we're taking a moment to celebrate you, our incredible viewers and supporters. From the beginning, your love for African folktales has inspired us to keep sharing the rich stories, wisdom, and culture of our beloved continent. Thanks to you, our stories have reached hearts across the world, connecting people through the magic of African folklore. Every like, comment, and share reminds us why we do what we do. You've made Africtalis TV more than just a channel, you've made it a community, a family. Your support means the world to us. We see your feedback, your love for the stories, and your excitement for what's next. And guess what? The journey has just begun. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being part of Africtalis TV. Let's keep the stories alive, together. Don't forget to like, share, and invite others to join our growing family. Stay tuned, there's so much more to come.